All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Jeff Tan. I'm a student with Hamilton Think Tank. We're putting on this program tonight. It's called Just Say No, Abstinence-Only versus Safe-Sex Education. This is a program that I've been excited to sit through since we came up with the idea last term. And we have a panel full of very qualified people that will give a very stimulating conversation tonight. So I'd like to just introduce the panel, starting down over there. We have Brother John Marie Bingham. He's the Dominican resident seminarian on the St. Thomas More Newman Center. And then we have Sara. She's a U of O undergraduate and peer health educator. We have Jessica Bogli, and she's private health education consultant, a former health education curriculum specialist with the Oregon Department of Education. And then we have Reverend Melanie Oommen, and she's with the First Congressional Church, followed by Mary Gossard, who is the Vice President, Education and Training of Planned Parenthood Health Services of Southwestern Oregon. And we have Janae Schiller. She's a Youth Action Counselor member for Planned Parenthood. And then we have Jed Johnson and Willow Dodd, who are both directors for Stop and Think, which is an abstinence-only organization. Now I'm going to turn the mic over to Kevin Hatfield, who will discuss the bibliography.
Welcome, everyone. I just wanted to mention briefly that our collaboration with the library is ongoing, and Elizabeth Peterson, one of our humanities librarians, and Barbara Jenkins, who's the head of the reference department at the library, have compiled an annotated bibliography for this evening. I'm going to distribute that, and this is a condensed version of the bibliography. There's a URL link at the bottom of the page which will direct you to the library's Living Learning Communities website that has a more extensive bibliography. We'll also be distributing some of the panelists' handouts this evening. Those, I believe, will also be available on the library website for any of you who would like to log in and look at those. Actually, you don't need to log in, but just visit the site. And Jed Johnson, who we didn't have time to get his handouts printed up tonight, we're going to make sure that your handouts are also on that website as well. So for anybody who's interested in the handouts or the bibliography, please visit the library website. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the panel. I'll just mention we don't have a formal moderator this evening, so we're starting on the far end, and we're just going to present in order and then open it up to question and answers.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to be here. As it was said, I'm Brother John Marie Bingham. I'm at the Newman Center over on 18th and Emerald. We're the Catholic ministry to students here at the U of O and local community colleges. And I thought I would start by trying to contextualize the question a little bit, because I think what finally we're asking about is how do we educate about sex? What does it mean to educate ourselves about sex? And it's a tough question, because there's a lot of questions that come under that question. For instance, who does it? Who's going to be the one that educates? What do they teach? And what authority do they base their teaching on? The question of who teaches from a Catholic perspective is a very important one, because whenever we try to teach something, you don't just have one community you're a part of. You're a part of your family. You're a part of the University of Oregon here. You might be a part of some religious faith, or might perhaps not. You might be a community within the University of Oregon studying some particular topic. So for us, the question of sex, because it's so fundamental to who we are as human beings, has to be reinforced or understood within all those communities. It's not something that just happens in a school classroom. And so as we discuss it from a Catholic perspective, it's a difficult question, because it's more than just a governmental policy, whether it's abstinence only or safe sex education that's presented. From a Catholic perspective, sexual education has to be done in a much larger context. Sexuality is part of who we are as human beings, and it's intimately connected with that. I think it makes sense to say that we can't separate our sexuality from who we are. We can't just go out and act however we want sexually and have no effect on the rest of us, the rest of ourselves as a human person. That makes the question much bigger, though, because all of a sudden you start asking, what does it mean to be a human person, and how does sexuality fit into that person, into that personhood? Just very briefly, because I can't elaborate completely here and now, the Catholic Church would certainly teach that sex is only understood in the context of true love, that is, a true giving of self one to another. So the idea of abstinence only, it's not just saying no, it's actually saying yes to something else. It's actually saying yes to the ability to freely and totally give yourself to someone else. And at times that demands sacrifice. But we'll talk more about that. I think there's some notion in our society that there's no way as human beings that we can say no, that we can deny ourselves things, and yet we do it every day. If you're an athlete, you know that. You deny yourself certain things you might enjoy in order to perfect yourself in other ways. It's the same thing in the moral realm. From a Catholic perspective, we deny ourselves certain things in order to perfect ourselves in other ways. But to back up and look at the question a little bit more, if you just want to look at the programs from perhaps what I might call a secular perspective, I think you could run into problems both with an abstinence-only or a safe sex presentation. The problem potentially with an abstinence-only presentation might be that it doesn't give that full context of the human person. So the motivations that are given to students in some abstinence-only programs, I don't want to blanket them because I know there's many different and they come from different perspectives, might be motivations of fear. You don't want to get disease. You don't want to get pregnant. They might not give that other positive context of the values that a person might find in their life by respecting themselves and the other person and abstaining until later. There's also perhaps no teaching on what it means to deal with the sexual energy. As sexual beings, we can't deny that sexual energy is there. Now, we have choices, though. Some parts of our society would say you need to act on that in order to be a healthy human being. Catholic Church would say there might be other ways, or would say even more strongly, there are other ways of directing that in healthy ways to serve others, to give yourself to others, etc. There's also problems, of course, from a Catholic perspective with a safe sex presentation because it comes with a certain illusion. You might have heard this before. What do you mean by safe sex? This illusion that I think comes from using contraceptives and other means to try to prevent disease, that somehow or other you can get away with having sex with no consequences. And there's a certain invulnerability that if you follow this, you're going to be fine. And I just think the statistics don't support that. It's not true. And even if you can prevent pregnancy and disease, that denies the other parts of the human person that are involved, the emotional, the psychological, etc. The other problem is, and this would be true also with abstinence-only, and it's often pointed out about the abstinence-only approach, is the follow-through. The critique of abstinence-only programs is people are going to have sex anyway, so why even bother with an abstinence-only program? I might say the same thing about a safe sex program. Statistically speaking, at least from what I've read, there's not many people that follow through with their safe sex practices. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. There are people who use condoms, et cetera, to prevent disease and try to prevent pregnancy. But there's also many who don't, or they don't consistently, and that is shown statistically. So the problem of follow-through is there with both programs, no matter how you look at it. And then even if you are faithful to using condoms especially, which would be especially the primary means perhaps with disease, when you're thinking of disease, you don't even have 100% protection there. You're still playing a game. The only way to be completely safe is abstinence only. So from a Catholic perspective, we would say, let's look at this again and see what a fuller context might give us. First of all, from a Catholic perspective, the human person is capable of controlling themselves. So any sort of presentation which would say it's unhealthy or unnatural to stop those natural inclinations, from a Catholic perspective, we say that's just not true. Yes, that energy's there, but no, it's not impossible to redirect it to other means of expression. Healthy ways of giving yourself, even in service to others. Exercise might be the simple way in a moment. Another aspect of this would be the rights of the parents from a Catholic perspective. I think that we tend to figure that we are isolated people, but the reality is our very identity is connected with others. And so whenever we're thinking about how to present the teaching on sexuality, you have to consider what are all the communities that a person belongs to. And so it's not just their own sort of selfish world, if you will, their own self-contained world, I should say, but it's also in a larger context. And from a Catholic perspective, the parents have a very important role in presenting sex teaching. Also, the human person isn't just about sort of what I might call sexual activity, but it's more, the human person is designed to love and to be loved. And so sex is one means of expressing that, but it's not perhaps even the primary in some circumstances, even though it's a very powerful way of doing so. Finally, from a Catholic perspective, we would want to teach, obviously, the respect for other people. And this is where I feel that at times, hidden under the guise of respect is actually a certain disrespect. Because for many of us, sexual activity is really about satisfying our own desires. From a Catholic perspective, it's a constant effort to try to change that, to be truly giving oneself to another. And so the use of another person to satisfy sexual desires would never be correct, even if it's done in a safe sex context, even if it's done with protection. So, all that being said, we would certainly lean towards and advocate abstinence until marriage, but not as a sort of a restriction of the human person, but as a means of freeing the human person so they can truly give themselves to another, to their partner, and in marriage.
All right, hi, I'm Sara. I am a senior here at the U of O, last term, finally. I'm an international studies and Spanish major and also a peer health educator, which is a program on health advocacy and education on both personal and peer health as well as broader public health issues. And so I'm coming from the perspective, one as a student and someone who's both educated or been educated under both programs, Abstinence-Only as well as safe sex. And also taught under both programs, and my experiences with both of those programs and how my personal life was affected by both of them and my frustrations and pleasures with dealing with both programs and dealing with them. So a big part of it, I think, for students and for youth today has, like Brother said, that it has everything to do with where you come from and who you come from. And I come from a very small town, Prineville, Oregon, which is Central Oregon. Graduating class of under 200, which isn't that bad, but it's the whole county, so it's pretty small. And have a pretty typical family experience. Both my parents are from the Midwest, so raised Protestant Lutheran. I was raised Protestant Lutheran, pretty conservative, middle-class, Christian, moral upbringing. And the interesting thing with my family is that both my parents are health professionals. My mother's a nurse, and my father is an administrator for rural hospitals. And I find it interesting. A big interest area of mine within public health is sex education, mostly in small communities and being able to talk about sex education. I feel there's a really interesting disconnect between the ability to talk frankly and openly about sex within small communities and small, close families, even though there's that moral upbringing, even though my parents are both health professionals. And I think part of it has to do with the responsibility or the role that the moral upbringing has to do with it. But it just somehow still remains taboo to talk about many public health issues, especially sex education, which is why I think that I became interested in public health. And so my logic has always been, from my own experiences, that open communication and being able to talk about options and advocating for people to take control and to realize that they have options and are in control of what they do and must also be responsible, therefore, for their consequences, is the way to a more open and to creating a dialogue around this, which I think is really vital, and it's sort of ironic that it doesn't happen in small places. And even though I do come up from a small community, I think that I come from a very similar situation that other people from larger cities do as well, because there are always small niches everywhere. So my experience, mostly in high school, I got involved with the STARS program, and for those who don't know, it's an acronym for Students Today Aren't Ready for Sex. So it was a Just Say No program started in 1995 by the First Lady Kitzhaber, and it was addressed to 6th and 7th graders, and it talked about the pressures of relationships, dealing with peer pressure, the role of the media in promoting sex and early sexual involvement and all of that, and ended with an emphasis on teaching the kids the tools to just say no. The benefits of that, I thought it was great that they were getting in there early, especially in small towns like Prineville, and that the education was done by peers, role models that they could look up to, and that they tried to promote a sense of self that was valuable, that they could make the choice to abstain and got that positive reinforcement that if they were not having sex, that was okay and that it was fine. But there are also some, I think, insufficiencies with the program. Being one of the educators, we were required to defer any real life questions about sex or abuse or any instances that really did come up in these students' lives to the teacher or their parents or a trusted adult, which sort of, one, they didn't educate us as the educators on what are STDs, how can I follow up with these questions, how do I really advocate for this child to be empowered to talk to a teacher, someone that could really help them. And then second, we weren't given the tools to even approach the question, but just said, that's interesting, you should talk to your teacher about that. And so it was always something that sort of cringed within me, and I was lucky, I hope nobody held back, but I never had to deal with that. But that's sort of the thing that those kind of educators are prepared for, should be prepared for, is that hard question when something does come up like that and you can really make a difference. And so that was my one major problem with the program, and what I've heard and seen from friends and have experienced with friends becoming pregnant or not knowing, not being educated, having to deal with partners not knowing that, they had STDs and contracting them themselves, and where does that all come from, and how is communication somehow halted. And I feel lucky to have pursued my interests and gotten involved with the peer health program, which is I would consider the safe sex method as much more, I like it for its dialogue and being able to open up the room for questions, and people can really ask honest questions, and you can get a bunch of people together like today and really talk and not deliver ultimatums or condemn people before you know their experience, or really kind of put people out of the picture before you can actually get to them with an education curriculum. And and also because, like in the STARS program, the statistics and the information that you do give are not only lacking, but the fact that you have to defer information, and you're not presented as an authority on the figure, and you can't really get into the matter that much. It leaves room for a lot of misinformation and education about that, and I think that as a student and someone who's gone through that program and then educated in it and was lucky enough to receive education and somehow find on my own an interest to pursue a more open form of education, just that lack of being able to pursue critically and really inquire into your own desire and power and self-respect from people that I've been lucky enough to talk to. If you give them choice and option and put them in control of their situation, oftentimes what I've come across is that they feel so much a much better sense of self about who they are and being able to control and decide when and where and with whom, and yes or no, if this is really going to be the consequences of sex, do I really want to take that step with this person, with my partner right now, or is it something that knowing my body, knowing how it works, knowing what the consequences are, that I feel the power and the need and to protect myself and to wait for a truly more equal and consensual and powerful sexual experience. And I think that education and just opening it up by offering these choices and empowering people, along with the reinforcement that you don't have to have sex, is indeed, has been for me what has really propelled my interest. And so it's my long-term goal to somehow continue in that and really fight that communication barrier that I think exists when you isolate certain groups, especially in early education around public health issues, and really push them out into the public sphere to open them up to really tear apart and deconstruct and hopefully put back together in some semblance of order or a working order for everyone. So that's it for now, I guess.
My name is Jess, and I'm coming from a kind of K-12 perspective. My background is I was a 7th grade health teacher in North Portland for 6 years, and then I left the classroom to pursue a job with the Oregon Department of Education in Salem, and I oversaw school health education, K-12, and my role there was to support teachers teaching health education, K-12, but I was actually federally funded through the Centers for Disease Control. So I actually worked nationally with my counterparts around the country. And I think one thing that I would like to talk a little bit about is terminology and definitions. And I will refer to the handout in a couple of minutes. When we talk about definitions, there's a lot of different definitions out there and terms out there, but abstinence-only, I think most people are pretty familiar with abstinence-only programs and curricula that's out there that, of course, promote abstinence as the safest choice for our school-aged youth, and most do not talk about contraception, although, of course, within the term of abstinence-only, there's definitely other groups as well. There's abstinence-only until marriage, and that promotes abstinence as the safest choice for school-age youth until marriage, and marriage is typically defined in those programs as a marriage between a man and a woman. And then there's abstinence-based, which is also safe sex, which is also comprehensive sexuality education. So those terms, to me, mean very similar things. And they also promote abstinence as the safest choice for school-aged youth, but also include information and skills around contraception and other choices for students that have possibly made the choice to be sexually active, or at some point in their life, if they do choose to be sexually active, will gain those skills and information. And you know, one thing that health education has really made a paradigm shift. We used to teach health education, and it was very knowledge-based. It was like, read chapter 11 and on smoking, and I quiz you, and you get an A, and now you're never going to smoke, right? And there's really been a shift in how we teach health education, which is to teach skills. So students have skills to make choices. And so those skills are actually listed on this sheet, and those skills come from the National Health Education Standards. You do not see content here. You don't see tobacco prevention or violence prevention or sexuality issues. But really what the focus in health education now is to teach students and allow students opportunities to demonstrate how to access information, manage their behaviors, analyze influences like media, communicate with others, set goals, decisions, and advocate for themselves and for others. And so really that focus is so that students, no matter if they're abstaining from tobacco use or abstaining from doing homework or abstaining from sex, have the skills to make the decision that's healthiest for them And a great example of this is a dear friend and an amazing teacher in Wisconsin who has won many awards in health education. And she had a student, a senior, come to her and say, "Miss Tackman, you know, I'm pregnant." And Miss Tackman ran over to her grade book and looked up her name and said, "But you got an A on the sex ed test. How could you be pregnant?" You know, and the whole point is that, you know, Miss Tackman wasn't doing such a great job of the skill building of, all right, you know, do you know how to communicate to say no, or to refuse, or to say yes to condoms? Did this student really have the opportunity to develop their skills so in that situation they could make a different decision? And so just, you know, we call it the plumbing, you know, just giving students the plumbing of what our bodies do biologically might not be enough. And so really that focus has gone to more skill building activities. In elementary school, typically around this area of promotion of sexual health, it's risk reduction, mostly around disease prevention. Don't touch blood. Don't touch foreign objects on the playground. Those sorts of issues. Bad touch, good touch. How to communicate if there's an issue. Who to talk to and access information. In upper elementary, more 5th grade. Some schools with 6th grade. You start kind of the male-female bodies, some puberty information, and then in middle school, it does cover abstinence. Of course, is the safest choice for our school-aged youth, and that I keep saying because it tends to be a universal value. Most people in our communities and society believe that. Not everyone, but most people do. In middle school, we talk about sexual intercourse, pregnancy, with a focus again on abstinence and risk reduction, and again, these skills, so that students are practicing refusal skills and role plays so that they're able to, in a situation on a Saturday night at a party, able to use those skills that they have practiced, I think research says, between 9 and 12 times, so that when they've practiced it that many times, they can transfer it to real life. In high school, all the above, everything I mentioned is also covered, promotion of abstinence as well, but it does cover contraception, and some middle schools cover that as well, and risk reduction methods. And there's a real focus on accessing information when needed and communication skills. In Oregon, all different curricula is used K-12 around this area of sexual health. So there are some laws that I'll talk about in a minute, but most of the time there's all different curricula that's used. In my role, I helped school boards and partners and teachers and parents and students select curricula that fit certain guidelines. And those guidelines were they fit the laws, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We made sure that they had criteria like, are they medically accurate? Are they free of bias and stereotype? Are they acceptable and compatible within the norms of the community? Every community in Oregon is a little different. For example, when I was in North Portland in 7th grade, my parents actually supported a condom demonstration in 7th grade. That isn't acceptable or necessarily going to be acceptable in every community in Oregon. So, and it's not the law to do that. So you need to know your community and really be aware of what community is saying and what they support. Is the curriculum affordable? Are there hidden costs? Are there learning objectives? Are the instructional materials varied? So these are really the issues that I discussed with teachers to make sure that it was acceptable. Also, does it promote positive behaviors, or is there a picture on the front of a kid that's bicycling without a helmet? So just examples of, you know, looking at the pictures and making sure that it's promoting healthy behaviors versus pictures of, you know, students smoking throughout the book or the curriculum. One thing that Sara mentioned was kind of how to talk to your parents, or is there a protocol? At the state level, we do have a protocol called Answering Difficult Questions, and we do a lot of training for teachers and prevention specialists around how to answer students' questions. If it's a personal question, obviously a teacher needs to be comfortable answering that question as long as it's appropriate. And I mean, like, are you married or do you have children? Because for some teachers, that's actually not a very comfortable question to answer. And then fact-based questions. So if there's a fact question, something like, why do women have breasts? The teacher, can answer that question. And if it's a value-based question, like tell me a little bit about abortion, or why are we in the war? Those are definitely more loaded questions, a little bit difficult to answer. And so we have a protocol that actually allows the teacher to say, some people believe this, some people believe this, some people, you know, is there any other beliefs that I didn't mention? And you actually move around the room so that students can kind of see where they're at, but also understand a broader perspective. And at the end of the protocol, you always thank the student for asking the question so that they are likely to ask questions in the future. And you always send them to a trusted adult, a parent, a guardian, clergy, someone that they can talk to, because that's really where they're going to get their values and make their decisions as well. So that's kind of from the Department of Education standpoint, what we're doing around sex education. The laws, I do have a few copies of the laws if you're interested. There is a law that states that if sex education is taught, it needs to be comprehensive or safe sex in Oregon. So that's something age appropriate, of course, but that is a law in Oregon. There is another law that states that every year, so annually, grades 6 through 12, HIV, AIDS, hepatitis prevention is taught as well. So we know that, you know, schools definitely want some more support around that area, but that is an area that we're working on. And as far as efforts in the state level, we have a group called the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Group. It's a governor's initiative, and they work on sexual health promotion issues. We have the Oregon Healthy Teens Survey data. If you went to school in Oregon and you were a high school student, you may have taken that survey at 8th and 11th grade. That is an excellent survey for us to collect information on teen behaviors to help us then focus when and where to prevent those, because we need to start prevention 2 years before initiation of the behavior. So if students aren't wearing seatbelts in 7th grade, then we need to start prevention kind of like in 5th grade and start talking about seatbelt use. We have health education standards, which you have in front of you, and so this is how we teach health education. We have youth forums happening all around the state with high school students and middle school students to allow them opportunities to talk about these issues, and numerous grants around the state. So from a K-12 perspective, we're doing a lot of work around sexual health promotion is what we've been calling it. If you're interested in more information on what specifically we teach around content, I have some copies of the K-12 curriculum, and it's not just sex education, it's the whole curriculum in health education. So it includes violence prevention, alcohol, disease prevention, healthy eating, and all those other issues. So thank you.
I know there's a handout coming around, but I'll start talking. You don't need it for this first part of what I'm going to say, and then once everybody has it, I'll talk about what that's about. I never would have guessed when I graduated from seminary 11, 12 years ago that part of my ministry would be teaching comprehensive sexuality education in a local church. I never would have guessed that that would have been part of my profile. I was raised in a home that was, that perhaps like many of your homes, unfortunately, I don't know that this has changed a lot over generations, but where sexuality wasn't talked about, that there was a lot of, through that silence, there was a lot of shame, a lot of confusion, and there really wasn't open access. I was really grateful, actually, growing up in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, that it seemed to be a pretty progressive time in sexuality education in the public schools, at least where I grew up in southern Michigan. So I got a lot of good information, actually, from school that I still remember. So thank you, public school education, for being the only source for me of sexuality education. But I knew as a person growing up and coming into adulthood and in my own relationships as a college student and as a young adult, that there was a lot missing for me in my understanding of human sexuality, that the fullness and wholeness of what it means to be a sexual being, which we all are, from the moment we're born to the moment we die, we are sexual beings. And so I guess because of that history, it felt like a really, even though it was surprising to me on many levels that my ministry called me to teach sex ed in the local church, at the same time, kind of looking at my life, it actually made perfect sense, that I really felt a deep yearning and calling for the young people that I work with and the families that I work with to have a different path and to have a different experience of their sexuality. So about 6 years ago, our congregation began to talk, thanks to the, and I'm sure you're going to perhaps reference this, the rights, respect, responsibility movement that Oregon, and I won't say a lot about this because I'm not very knowledgeable, but I know how it impacted our congregation. The idea of creating a cultural shift in our attitudes and norms around sexuality education, particularly for young people, and the end result hoping to be healthier lives for everyone. But of course, we need to start with young people. So our congregation, which is First Congregation United Church of Christ, and we're over on 23rd and Harris, just south of the university, we had a group of people, all ages and kind of all walks of life, that got together and started to talk about, well, you know, as a faith community, what is our responsibility in this, and helping educate and helping inform and helping support young people and people and families, everyone in our congregation, around issues of sexual health. And so we did a lot of conversation, a lot of education for ourselves, and it became really clear to us two things: that young people look to their religious communities for guidance and for support and for information around sexuality, and that most congregations, and I'm not saying just Christian, I think this is kind of across the board, most religious communities, like our larger culture, are really uncomfortable talking about human sexuality, and very clear and, and just talking about it at all. And silence speaks very loudly. So we felt, as we journeyed through this, that we had a great responsibility, a great obligation to not be silent and to take a positive, proactive approach. So thankfully, I am a part of a denomination, the United Church of Christ, that had thought about this even before our church 6 years ago had, and that's the handout that was passed around. In 1983, our General Synod, which is the kind of the every other year meeting of all of the churches in the United States, declared that there needed to be an extensive study around issues of sexuality education in the local church. And out of that came these principles guiding the United Church of Christ and our commitment to sexuality education. And this was about 1985 when these principles came out. And I'll just kind of briefly run through them, and then I'll talk about how that's impacted the course that our congregation has taken. First of all, these are our core values and principles around sexuality and sexuality education. First of all, that sexuality is a God-given gift, that it's beautiful, that we all have it, no matter who we are, no matter our level of ability, no matter our age, no matter our sexual orientation. We all are gifted with human sexuality as a gift from God. Number two, the purposes of sexuality are to enhance human wholeness and fulfillment, to express love, commitment, delight, and pleasure, and to bring new life into the world and to give glory to God. So there are many, many purposes for the expression of human sexuality. When making decisions about sexuality, the primary guide is God's call to love and justice as revealed in both testaments. From a biblical perspective, sexuality is intended to express, actually I want to go back to number 3 because I think this is important. In matters of human sexuality, I'm reading from the expanded version of these guidelines, we do not limit our study of the scriptures to only those passages where words such as sex, marriage, and divorce are found. Many of those passages are confusing, but rather we expand our biblical themes to reflect on human sexuality, other themes such as creation, exodus, incarnation, resurrection, love, and justice. And that these themes, these values can inform our conversation, our values, our beliefs around human sexuality. From a biblical perspective, sexuality is intended to express mutuality, love, and justice. In judging whether behavior is ethical or unethical, the norms of mutuality, love, and justice are the central criteria. From a biblical perspective, sexuality is distorted by unethical behaviors, attitudes, and systems that foster violence, exploitation, infidelity, assertion of power, and the treatment of persons as objects. Number 6, in developing a just sexual morality, we need to avoid double standards. And I think in our culture, primarily where we see that is around male-female gender roles. so we hope to address that in our education as a church. A responsible and mature sexual ethic respects the moral agency of every person. I think this is a really, these are all central themes for us, but I want to stop there for a minute because for the past 5 years, so the course that our congregation chose was to provide comprehensive sexuality education to our young people in our church. And we went to our high school students and we went to our parents and we said, where should we start with this? And what we heard from the high school students is that the young people in the church really needed a good foundation before moving into high school. They all said 8th grade or later middle school. Take the time to do this then. If no other time, please take the time then. And the moral agency of, I guess coming back to that, so I've been teaching for 4 years. I've been teaching every Wednesday night a 27-week course for 8th graders. And interestingly enough, it wasn't just of interest to the families in our congregation, but we've attracted kids. I mean, we have waiting lists for this class, which is, I find, extremely interesting. It's a lot of fun. We talk about things that matter in a way that is developmentally appropriate for the young people that we teach. And we do it in the context of faith and values of the whole person, which is an extraordinary freedom we have as a congregation. We don't have some of the restraints, I think, that our public schools have to deal with. At the same time, I feel the weight of the responsibility of what we're teaching and how we're teaching it tremendously. So the moral agency piece, because this is a piece for a lot of churches and religious organizations that's tricky. We believe in our denomination, and I personally believe that each person has moral agency, that they will choose for their own life what is best, when to engage in sexual intercourse or sexual intimacy of a whole range and variety, how they will encounter their relationships, how they will behave. I mean, each of us has that power in our lives. And it's not up to me as a pastor to dictate to someone at what point they would be, for example, engaging in sexual intercourse or having a committed relationship. It's not up to me to tell them when exactly that's appropriate. It's up to me to provide good education, comprehensive, I believe, comprehensive sexuality education. It's up to me to provide the moral and ethical information and reflection, and to provide support to young people, that I will be a non-judgmental listener and a companion throughout their life's journey. And that our community can be that for them, to support them, to challenge them, to encourage them throughout their journey. And I'm mindful of the time, so I'm going to wrap up really quickly. And just the last couple, the church at all levels ought to be a context for discussion about human sexuality. And number 9, the church ought to encourage and support advocacy with those who are sexually oppressed or the victims of sexual violence and abuse. The church can and must have a role in defining and implementing public policy. And that's something we take very seriously. Out of these guidelines, a sexuality education, a comprehensive sexuality education curriculum was developed called Our Whole Lives. It's a lifespan curriculum. It starts with kindergartners, it goes through adulthood. We haven't implemented the whole span at our church, but we have the 8th grade and then the high school curriculum. And it's been extraordinary. I think to talk openly and honestly and in the fullness of the way we approach human sexuality, we spend a lot of time in relationships, decision making, our values, talking about identity, sexual identity. I mean, you can imagine in 27 weeks we cover a lot of ground. It communicates to young people that church can be a place, that a religious community can be a place where you can bring your whole self. You don't have to leave part of you outside the church, that we can talk about anything here. And it's been an extraordinary gift to me as a person, and it's been an extraordinary gift to me as a minister, to walk down this path that I would never have expected. One last thing I want to say is that this curriculum that I teach is abstinence-based. And one value that we teach is that it's best for young people, for young teens, to postpone sexual activity until later teens, early 20s, that's a healthier choice for them. But again, we won't be there when they make their choices. So the best we can do, and I think it's the very best we can offer, is the support, comprehensive sexuality education, good information, and to be their community for them and their families. So, I think I went a little long. Your turn, Mary.
You were great. My name is Mary Gossard. I'm with Planned Parenthood, and I thought it might be useful to first give a little bit of background about how Planned Parenthood approaches its education program. Our Southwestern Oregon Planned Parenthood, while a pretty small affiliate as Planned Parenthoods go around the country, we have one of the largest education programs, and we really approach education from, I kind of look at it as a three-tiered approach. First, we offer direct education programs to young people, reaching about 25,000 youth every year from elementary school age on up through university level. We are invited to many, many public schools, alternative education sites in the community at the K-12 level, primarily because, as I think Jess might tell you, there aren't a lot of certified sex educators out there. In fact, certified health educators are a dying breed. And I don't know what it was like when you all were back in high school and middle school, if you even had sex education, but it may have been your experience that if you did, it may have been taught by the coach, or it may have been taught by, I see some heads going, yes. That may not necessarily be a bad thing if the coach was, well trained, but the reality of it is there are not a lot of trained professionals doing this work, and that's a problem. At Planned Parenthood, we have people who go through a certification process. They are very well qualified to teach sexuality education, and they teach it from a thoughtful, respectful, and importantly from a research-based perspective. So we're teaching programs from the perspective of what science has told us is safe and effective. Planned Parenthood, through both its education programs and through the healthcare services that we offer, which I'm not going to talk about, but if you have questions later, I'd be happy to respond about our other services. We support young people in making informed and healthy decisions, whether they're choosing to say yes to sex or to say no to sex. We believe very strongly that they need to gain information and skills that will support them in their sexual decisions throughout their lifetime. So the education is not just for now, but for their lifetime. Because if you think about it, once young people get out of high school, unless they really seek it out, they're probably going to not have very many formal opportunities to get sex education. You may seek it out at the university level, but sort of once you've left that formal schooling behind, the opportunity is not available. So we really want to make sure that we are approaching this as teaching lifelong skills, not necessarily teaching them because we think they're having sex now, or that they should have sex now, or they're going to have sex in a couple of days. But we look at it as a lifetime kind of an education. We also, the second tier for us is working with parents. We believe very strongly that parents are where it's at when it comes to educating their children about their personal values and beliefs and morals around sexuality. No one can do it better than parents in terms of being able to convey that. But they struggle. How many of you feel real comfortable talking to your parents about sex, or in fact, were raised with your parents talking with you pretty openly about sex? So if you look around the room, it's a little bit less than half. And there are a lot of parents that really struggle. So part of Planned Parenthood's work is to support parents in being able to have these conversations with their children from the time they're very young, in age-appropriate ways, sharing factual information as well as sharing personal values and beliefs. And that's not for Planned Parenthood to dictate or for anyone else to dictate. Our role is simply to support parents in being able to find their voice and share that with their children. And sort of coupled with that, we work very closely with the religious community, with religious leaders, with people like Melanie, and many, many other faith leaders who have awakened to the fact that they do play a very important role in providing sexuality education to the young people that participate in their faith tradition. And that young people, in fact, really seek that out and say that they want to hear from their religious leaders about these issues. They don't want to be preached to, but they want to be guided. And I think that's one of the things that I've especially seen Melanie and First Congregational Church do so beautifully in such a clear but non-judgmental and very welcoming way, providing factual information comprehensively, steeped in their faith tradition to give young people the guidance and the support that they need. And we see roughly 2,000 parents and families working within faith communities and other venues. That's our second tier. The third tier is we provide programs for communities, community members and professionals who themselves are in positions of being potentially what we call askable adults in young people's lives, who can really provide support and information if young people come to them for that guidance and support. So our programs are really anchored in the three values of rights, respect, responsibility, which Melanie mentioned earlier. We believe that young people have the right to accurate, comprehensive information. We believe that they have the right to healthcare services, accessible healthcare services. We believe that young people deserve respect. We see them as valued members of the community who have a lot to offer. And the third piece, the responsibility piece, is that we entrust that young people can and will take on the responsibility to make healthy and sound decisions about their sexual behaviors if we, the culture, take on our responsibility and provide them with accurate information, provide them with access to services, teach them the skills, and offer them the guidance and the support to do so. So those are the core values that really drive the programs that we offer. I want to make an observation about the title of this evening's conversation, which is Abstinence-Only versus Safer Sex Education. And I really believe that framing the issue in that way is part of the problem. That it continues to keep us stuck in this rut where we spin our wheels and argue about who's right and who's wrong. And while we keep doing that, then young people bear the brunt of that decisiveness. While we keep doing that, the United States has the highest unintended teen pregnancy, birth, and abortion rates in the entire industrialized world. And that Western European countries like Germany, France, and the Netherlands, whose rates of unintended teen pregnancies, births, abortions, STI rates, HIV rates, are a mere fraction of what we see here in the United States. If we look at those countries and look at what they're doing that has resulted in this great success, they offer comprehensive sex education, they offer access to health services for youth that are confidential, they support family communication about sexual health issues, they have media programs and media messages that advocate healthy, responsible sexuality. They have public policy that's based on the science and that really supports proven public health, research-based approaches to these sexual health issues. So I think there's a lot that we can learn from them. And this Rights, Respect, Responsibility initiative that we've launched here in Oregon is really steeped in taking a look at what's happening in Western Europe, seeing what we can learn, and determining if there's a way that we can adapt that to meet the needs of our own communities here in Oregon. I also want to make the observation that abstinence-only education and safer sex education are each inadequate in their own ways. They are both, taken on the surface, really pretty limited approaches. I would prefer us to consider what you've heard tonight, comprehensive sex education, which by definition includes education about abstinence, includes education about what we call safer sex or contraceptive use, condom use. But it also includes all of these skills-based issues that Jess brought up earlier, communication skills, decision-making skills. It teaches about body image. It certainly does teach about condoms and contraception and abstinence, etc., but it teaches about communication. It teaches about healthy relationships. It teaches about a broad range of issues that impact our sexuality and impact our ability to make healthier sexual decisions throughout our lifetime. So a comprehensive approach, not just safer sex, not just abstinence only. Sex education should be about personal health and safety, about one's personal beliefs and values, not about just one moral or faith perspective, and certainly not about politics. But it has become so political. Since 1997, our government has allocated over $1 billion for abstinence-only until marriage education, despite the fact that we don't have evidence that this type of education is in fact impacting sexual decision-making and behaviors for youth on the long term. We have ample research that shows that a comprehensive approach, as I defined earlier, is effective. And yet, because we've made it so politicized, we have not, at least with this current and the previous administration, have not put any funding into supporting comprehensive sex education that we know is effective. You may have heard on the news just yesterday, I believe it was, the 8th state has now decided to reject abstinence only until marriage funding because of its strict limitations. It's very prescriptive. It requires that young people be taught that sex outside of marriage is likely to be psychologically and physically harmful. It's prescribed that they must teach that sex outside of marriage is the expected standard for human behavior, despite the fact that 90% of people have sex before they get married. So, from my perspective as a sex educator at Planned Parenthood for 26 years and previously as a health and sex educator in a local Catholic school and just really a wide range of experience in this work, I would hope that we can get out of that rut and get out of the debate and get out of the this or that and talk about how do we make it inclusive. From my perspective, comprehensive is inclusive. And based on what I've experienced in my role over the 26 years at Planned Parenthood, it's what people, young people, are telling us that they want and they need, and I believe they deserve. Thank you. And I have handouts. I'll just leave them here if you're interested based on, it's the research. You're welcome to take them.
All right, my name is Janae Schiller, and I'm a senior at North Eugene High School, and I attend the International High School over there. And I will be attending the U of O in the fall. What Mary mentioned about about framing the issue abstinence only versus safer sex education. It's kind of funny to me because I sit here and I think, here we are floating on a ball in space, in the middle of this like huge universe, and we're making a big deal out of something that's very natural. And I mean, think about how many of you were a product of sex. I mean, we all are here for the same reason. The reason that 6 billion people are on this planet is because of sex. It's not something that should be taboo. It's really quite funny when you know how politicized everything is in the United States, and how the White House only funds abstinence-only education until marriage, because clearly that isn't working. Clearly, teens are going to have sex, and they're going to make their own decisions, and it's proven that teens are, very rebellious, and they aren't really going to do what they're told to do. And I mean, statistics prove that this form of education isn't working, because the United States rates of pregnancy are 80 and 1,000, and that's comparative to Belarus, Bulgaria, and Romania. And those aren't very industrialized nations. And, like Mary said, in the Netherlands, Holland is like 12 and 1,000 people get pregnant. And I believe this book is called Female Chauvinist Pigs. It's about women and the rise of raunch culture, and it's by Ariel Levy. But the reason why the U.S. and teenagers have the highest pregnancy rates, according to the AGI Institute, which conducts research and policy analysis on worldwide reproductive health. They said, she quotes in the book what they said, the primary reasons why U.S. teenagers have the highest rates of pregnancy, childbearing, and abortion among developed countries is less overall contraceptive use and less use of the pill or other long-acting reversible hormone methods, which have the highest use effectiveness rates. Factors in cross-country differences in teenagers' contraceptive use include negative societal attitudes towards teenage sexual relationships, restricted access to, and high cost of reproductive health services, and ambivalence towards contraceptive methods. I remember when I attended because I'm involved with Planned Parenthood's Revolution Teen Action Council, and we went to this sex conference at the Holt Center, and I got this little pen that said, condoms don't promote sex, they prevent mucous membranes from touching fluids. And so, I mean, that right there, says it all. I mean, we're human beings. We're all product of sex. It shouldn't be something that's taboo. We shouldn't have adults telling us, don't have sex, don't do this because you're going to get an STD and because you're going to get pregnant and stuff like that. Instead, we should be taught why we should have sex instead of why we shouldn't. Because sex in itself is actually a pretty beautiful thing when you think about it. It's not something that should be looked at as a scary thing. Of course, embodied in comprehensive sex education, that's what it talks about. You should have sex with somebody if you love them, if you know them. Don't just, I don't think a lot of teenagers are out at a party and they're just like, yeah, I'm just going to have sex with somebody, blah, blah, blah. And if they do, it's because they're confused, because they're not getting education. And it's proven that the more educated people are, the less that they spread STDs and go and have unprotected sex. And I remember the gentleman down there mentioning that statistics prove that people don't use contraceptive methods, and that's because they're probably not educated on it. That's probably because our government only promotes abstinence-only education. So, and also, too, what do we expect teens to do in a culture that's so, we have Paris Hilton on the cover of People magazine and Britney Spears with her boobs hanging out all the time, and we've got porn on the internet, we've got Playboy, we've got, as soon as you turn 18, you can go into porn shops. We've got all this in our movies. They promote sex so much. Our culture is screaming and the media is screaming about sex, but yet we're getting this abstinence-only education that's saying don't have sex. And so people are confused about their sexuality, especially women. They think that they're supposed to dress provocatively, get guys and whatnot. and yet they're told not to have sex. And so they don't really know what sex is all about. They don't know why they should have sex. And there was another quote that I wanted to say in this, or read in this book, that really embodies what I'm trying to say right now. By any measure, the way we educate young people about sexuality is not working. We expect them to dismiss their instinctive desires and curiosity, even as we bombard them with images that imply that lust is the most important appetite and hotness the most impressive virtue. Somehow, we expect people who are by definition immature to make sense of this contradictory mishmash. Our national approach to the prevention of sexuality, sexually transmitted diseases in pregnancy is predicated on the assumption that teenagers will want so badly to maintain their purity for marriage, despite the fact that half of their parents' marriages end in divorce, that they will ignore their own hormones, ignore the porn stars on MTV and all the blogs and blowjobs on the internet, and do as their teachers tell them. Unsurprisingly, teenagers are not cooperating with this plan. Rather than only telling teens why they shouldn't have sex, perhaps we ought to be teaching them why they should. We are doing little to help them differentiate their sexual desires from their desire for attention. And I think that right there pretty much says it all. We are living in a very sexually heated culture, and it shouldn't really be an issue, the abstinence-only versus safer sex education, because that really doesn't make sense. What makes sense is having a healthier culture where STDs aren't being spread, where unintended pregnancies aren't happening, and as long as unintended pregnancies aren't happening, abortion rates are going to go down as well. So, I mean, I'm definitely an advocate for comprehensive sex education. I think that that's what works. My experiences in high school have been very limited in regards to sexual education. I took an optional class last year, human sexuality, and that's actually how I met Mary, and how I got into this whole Revolution program. It was very comprehensive. Miss Flick taught it. She embodied what was comprehensive sexual education. You know, she included that an option was abstinence, you know, but she also made sure that we were free to talk about our sexuality. And I remember at the end of class, like on the last day of class, she got dressed up as a fairy and put a wand on all of us and wished us a happy sex life. And it was like, so, I mean, that's the way that it really should be. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Willow Dodd, and I am the director of the Stop and Think program here in Eugene, Oregon. It is an abstinence-only until marriage program. We work currently in every public high school and middle school in Lane County. I can speak for Lane County because that's where I direct. Jed will speak about some of our other counties soon. So we do speak in every public high school and middle school in Lane County. We speak from 6th grade to 12th grade, primarily focusing on 7th through 12th grade. Our decision program is geared towards the 7th and 8th grade students. We have a program called Reality, which is targeting 9th through 12th grade students. We have a program called New, which is targeting after-school programs as far as students being involved in a 6-week after-school program with us. And we also have a program called Listen, which is a program for parents to be involved in this discussion with their students. As an educator, I've been a public speaker for 5 years, and this last year recently took on the director role for this program. And one of my favorite things to do is to get up in front of a classroom full of students and introduce myself. And they're usually pretty okay with me, especially when I say my name's Willow. I have a bunch of giggles in the classroom and references to the movie. And then I talk about abstinence, and I watch their face go like that. And then I usually say, and just so you know, I'm here to tell you that sex is bad, gross, and awful, and if you do sex, you're bad, gross, and awful, and gonna die. And did I mention that sex is bad, gross, and awful, and it's really bad? And they are all just kind of looking at me like you guys are looking at me right now. And then I get into a 3 to 5 day presentation with these students where we basically backpedal from that stance on abstinence-only education. We backpedal on that stance on sex, And we really look at the relationship between the student as the presenter, the student and the presenter as the most effective method to communicate any message in a classroom in the state of Oregon and in the United States from our perspective. So when I looked at this discussion tonight, the title Just Say No popped out to me because I remembered seeing it on lemon head boxes in the 80s when you'd open them and it was that big Just Say No campaign against drugs and alcohol, and that made me feel really old. And then it made me think about this new Just Say No message, and that is really, gosh, it's got a lot of controversy around it as far as abstinence education goes, and I apologize, I'll be stuck to my notes a lot because I'm used to talking to high school students and I don't need so many notes there. Abstinence education is stirring up a lot of controversy. It's being targeted by being called far right. There are a lot of religious stereotypes put to abstinence education. It is causing controversy between community leaders, teachers, students, and other educators. And we're pretty much all standing at odds with this idea of abstinence-only until marriage sex education. Over the last 5 years, as a presenter with this program, I've been confronted with many different views concerning what I do in the classroom every single day, this program that we put into the community. And I look at us being at odds with abstinence education, and I wonder